up, guys? This is episode 5 of the bodybuilding educational series that we're doing. This episode is going to be focused on just off-season growth and everything that pertains to that. So we're going to jump into these questions and just get after it.
First question is, how long do you recommend to stay in a calorie surplus?
How long do I recommend to stay in a calorie surplus? I would say ultimately this all depends on your goals. I talked about this last episode, but for those of you guys that are really wanting to make substantial progress that are not just like genetic anomalies, I would really spend upwards of anywhere from 12 to 18 months in a surplus. Now, when I say in a surplus, I wouldn't be gaining at such a fast rate where you know that you're putting on body fat and being unrealistic about, lean tissue just versus overall size, and what I mean by overall scale weight, really overall scale weight, not size. So that's what you really need to be mindful of, aware of. So when it comes to the rate of growth, don't really force it, and I would say over a span of 12 months, 16 months, aim to put on, I would say a safe spot is anywhere from 30 to 40 pounds over your previous stage weight. And I'm talking obviously males here. I think that's a really good spot to be when you're going 40 and above, unless you are staying really, really lean and you know that you're putting on a substantial amount of lean tissue. I would really cap it out at 40. So my greatest off-season phases that I had personally, I was hitting, my best off-season, I maxed out. I was trying as hard as I could to hit 260. And I think I hit this, I hit a scale weight of 260 maybe 3 times that whole off-season. But really, I was hanging out more so around 255, 257. And I competed that year at 222, so I was right there at about that 35 pound range, if my math is correct. So that's where I like to hang out. So I would basically swing up about 35 pounds in my off season, and then I would cut that down in about 20 weeks time. So again, that was because my goal was to be as competitive as I wanted to be or needed to be within each weight category. So light, heavy, heavyweight, I maxed out as a heavyweight. So that's how I'd go about it. If we really need substantial time in a caloric surplus to put on the tissue that you need. And then again, I talked about this before too, but it's not just hitting peak strength. It's about hitting peak strength and then maintaining peak strength for a long period of time. So when you're looking back to previous off seasons, don't just judge it as, okay, I finally surpassed what I did last off season. Now I'm going to go into a deficit. What it's really about is surpassing your previous best, surpassing your previous off-season, and then holding that so that way when you go into a deficit, when you go into that dieting phase, you don't lose it immediately right off the bat.
Recommended protein intake during the off-season for muscle growth.
Okay, so what I would like to kind of rephrase this question or how I'd like to pitch this to you guys is in terms of protein intake for your off-season, what I would really truly base this off of is not your total scale weight, but your lean body mass. So really, what is that contest weight? Where are you competing at? That's what I would then gauge your protein requirements off of. General rule of thumb, I would say from that standpoint is 1 gram of protein to 1.5 grams of protein per pound of lean body mass. If you've never been in shape, just subtract. If you're in relatively good shape, I would subtract anywhere from 20 to 35 pounds from your total body weight. And then that's how you're going to get your lean mass. And then from there, I would multiply by 1 to 1.5 pounds or 1.5 to get your gram for your total protein intake.
What body fat percentage can you go up to during the off season?
I think a lot of people have a very skewed view of what true body fat percentage is. I hear a lot of people say that guys shouldn't go over 12 to 15%. But in my opinion, I would say more so like 15 to 18% is where I would cap it off at. 12% body fat, true body fat off of skin calipers, that's pretty decently lean. I mean, that's a really good composition. So I would say like the upwards if you're really pushing it. And again, like everybody is different. I would say a large majority of people stay and grow better in a leaner environment. Not so lean where leverages are an issue, where their leverages are shifting, where you feel the leanness, like when you're underweight and you just feel the difference in how that load feels. That's too lean. But where your body's staying in a positive position to uptake carbs, to utilize carbs properly rather than just storing carbs as fat. So that's different for every person. I would say on the max end, I would go on like the 15 to 18%, but anywhere from 12 to 18%, I think is a really good position to grow in. And I'm going to relate this back to contest prep. A lot of people, they say, like in that 8 to 12 week mark, point out from a show, that's when I feel my best. That's when I'm training my best. Obviously, for a lot of people, there's also hormones involved there, but I think it's greater than just the hormones involved. I think your body is back in a sensitive position to uptake and utilize carbohydrates properly. Your body fat percentages are now in a place where it's not hindering your performance, but it's also not hindering your body's ability to recover. Sleep isn't hindered, so there's influxes on both sides. Like if you get too heavy, you're not going to be able to perform as well. Your sleep is going to go south. If you get too light, the same things happen. So there's really that sweet spot, and you have to find that sweet spot for you. Everybody's not the same, but I would say generally for most people, anywhere from 12 to 18%. Beyond that, I just don't think it's needed.
In the off season, what is a good goal weight wise to hit weekly?
Okay, so this is asking to quantify what's a good weekly weight goal to hit. And again, this is where, so obviously you're going to hit a position where you start to stall out in terms of gaining weight. But really, again, guys, like you need to map out, if you're going to be this analytical, which I would say it's great to be, you need to take your total span of how long you're planning to be in a surplus, how long this off season is. Again, if you're going off of what I'm suggesting in the first question, anywhere from 12 months to 16 to 18 months. And then you need to span out if you're starting, let's say post contest, you're super lean, super primed to grow, and you are 185 pounds. And let's say if you're going to go off the rule of thumb of let's gaining 35 pounds, you need to space that 35 pounds off in terms of you're initially going to gain more back quickly. And what I would look for here is to gain back the fat that you need, fat, glycogen, water that you need to perform better in the gym, to have your satiety better through the day. One of the most important things is to get your sleep patterns back where you're getting the appropriate amount of deep sleep, REM sleep, the things that were lost during a contest prep when you get too lean. And then another thing too is just your ability or lack thereof to be food focused. You're going to notice the more that you venture and stabilize and homeostasis kind of comes back during an off season, the less you're going to be thinking about food, the less you're going to be staring at the clock for the next meal. All these habits that we get, into during a prep simply because we're starving ourselves, those things are going to start to dissipate. All right. So really earlier on in that span of 12 months, 16 months, 18 months, you want to gain a little bit back more quickly. And then you want to make it really sustainable. So let's say if you gain 15 back in the first 2 to 3 months, which I would say that's a good place to be. That's a good rate of gain for coming out of a show. Then obviously if you gain 15 back in 3 months and you're going to go 16 months, that means you have 13 months to gain, another 25 pounds. So really when it comes to that, the rate of gain should be like 1 pound, 1.25 pounds per month to make it realistic across that period. Also knowing that you might have periods where you're sick, where your weight stalls, where you just simply, for what your frame can hold at that time, can't gain anymore unless the quality is going to go south in a hurry. So I would consider all those factors when it comes to rate of gain in your off season. Again, prioritize a little bit more gain right off the rip because that's important to get homeostasis back and the things that I mentioned. And then you want to slow the rate of gain after that.
How do you control stomach growth or stomach distension in the off season?
When it comes to stomach growth and stomach distension in the off season, there's a few things that I would really keep in mind. One, obviously, as you're gaining more fat, that's going to be a part of your stomach getting bigger, okay? But that being said, I think there are a few things that you can be mindful of, obviously pay attention to. One thing, just as I'm sitting here in this chair, like I just have a mild contraction to my abs. I think a lot of bodybuilders in their off season, their awareness, or they just simply get lazy and they just stop controlling their midsection and they just let it just hang out. And that is thing number one that you really want to avoid. Second is just direct ab work. And I think one thing that, even as myself, as I've transitioned from strictly bodybuilder to just wanting to be more athletic, to play with my boys, to, endurance-based sports, I just really realized the amount of core training and oblique training and training that I did directly to my abs when I was an athlete growing up in college that I just forgot about or stopped doing once I went into bodybuilding. And I think it's very applicable to just that overall awareness, training your transverse abdominis. Those things are super important, that you don't just have to do a rope curl. There's so many ways to just be more mindful. Planks are a great thing to continue to do all throughout your off season. Different ways of training your abs with a stability ball. Those things are all great, so don't forget about those, or don't think that just because you're a bodybuilder that you can't train your abs in multiple different planes and, with multiple different types of exercises. That's also super important. And then lastly, paying attention to your digestion. This could be getting a food sensitivity test done. This could be just being aware of, okay, when I eat this food, I feel more bloated, staying away from those foods. But obviously, like as I said, and initially when I started this conversation about this question, it's going to be a natural thing that happens throughout the day, especially as you're pushing the amounts of food that are needed to grow. But I think if you aren't lazy, you're aware of what you're doing at rest with your midsection, that's going to help substantially. Continuing to directly train your core through multiple different exercises and multiple different planes, that's super important. And then paying very close attention to foods that can bloat you, distend you, that give you gas. All these things, going above and beyond and getting a food sensitivity test done, these things are all going to help just create a better environment to keep that midsection tight all throughout your off season.
What is your viewpoint on training a muscle group once versus twice a week for muscle growth?
My viewpoint for a greater majority of people is I don't think that their execution and their effort within individual sets is great enough to require or encourage them to train multiple times a day if they're truly trying to maximize growth. Now, I know last week we talked about beginners. I'm not including beginners in this conversation, but I'm talking about like when you're truly trying to max out a weight class, when you are trying to go from a really good amateur bodybuilder to a good professional bodybuilder. I think there's so much to be learned from getting the most out of single sets, single sessions, allowing your body to recover. I am very much on the low volume, high effort, high intensity into individual sets, Dorian style, rest pause, Dante Trudell's dog crap method. Like, these are the types of training when push comes to shove. And, if you're in a situation where, like, let's say, just getting really crazy here, but let's say, so-and-so, you have to put 80 pounds onto your bench, or you have to put 80 pounds onto your squat, or you have to put on 15 pounds of lean tissue in the next 18 months, or else, your family's going to be taken from you. If that type of person came to me and they were in that type of environment, I know this is extreme, but I'm just putting it into context. I would for sure put them on a low volume training plan that really prioritized rest, but really drove extreme amounts of effort high during those training sessions, and then allowed the proper rest so that way they continue to keep their output super high all throughout their off season.
How many cheat or refeeds should you have weekly? Also, would you calorie limit the meal?
How many cheat or refeeds should you have weekly during an off season phase? And questions like this, guys, are super hard to answer because I have no context. I have no idea of what your daily calorie consumption is. But I would say realistically, this is my viewpoint on cheat meals. Cheat meals in the off season should be for everybody but yourself more often than not. And what I mean by that is, if you have a family, if you have a spouse, if you have a girlfriend, family events, events with friends, that's when I would use these cheat meals. And I want to preface this by saying that just because you're not eating what's on your diet doesn't mean you have to go completely off the rails and just eat crap just for the sake of eating crap. Realistically, if you are in a growth phase, you should be in a surplus. So you don't need to then drive a greater amount of surplus through cheat meals, because that's what should be happening through daily nutrition and your daily diet. So I'm not saying never enjoy anything. I'm not saying never have dessert. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I think we just over glorify what a cheat meal should look like. And these cheat meals week after week after week after week are just putting unneeded fat that you don't need to have. This is a great way to look at it. So within your diet, in your off-season phase, in your surplus, you should be gaining, as we talked about earlier, let's say like 0.5 pounds per month, or 1.25 pounds at the max per month. So on a weekly basis, what you need to really assess for yourself and be analytical about is, what's actually driving that weight up. Is your weight stabilizing all week long? And then let's say on Saturday you have Cheesecake Factory and you jump up 5 pounds, and then from that 5 pounds you only baseline back down 3 pounds, and then so the next week you're at a positive plus 2 pounds up. But yet, really, we know that that wasn't quality gain. That was you added 2 pounds of fat from a cheat meal, glycogen, excess water that your body then never cleared back on your base diet, because the reason why it didn't clear is because you're already in a surplus all week. And therefore, week after week after week, this is a continuous cycle of your cheat meal then just adding unneeded excess weight to your frame that we know isn't quality weight. The way to gauge a cheat meal and if it's beneficial, if it's positive, and I'm saying from a truly cosmetic performance standpoint, is if you're in a surplus and you have the morning of that cheat meal day, you check your weight and it's 200 pounds. And then you have your cheat meal that night and you go up to 203, and then you baseline back down to 200 pounds before the next cheat meal. That's a good way to gauge if you're responsibly having cheat meals or not, but if your weight is increasing from the cheat meal and it's never getting back down to baseline what it was pre-cheat meal, and then you're having another cheat meal, that's just a great way to blow your off season.
How much cardio should you be doing in the off season?
Cardio in the off season, I'm a huge proponent of cardio for overall heart health, just for your ability to increase your work output. I would keep it in. Bodybuilding is something for, let's be honest, it's stressful on your heart. Why not keep your heart in better condition to actually handle that stress, and also to drive greater output, work output through your actual training? I think a lot of our training in the off season is hindered by how much weight we put on and the actual shape that we are in cardiovascularly. And that's what cuts off sets prematurely rather than what your muscle can actually do. So I'm a huge proponent of keeping cardio in all throughout your off season for heart health, for your ability to train harder, for your ability to, again, get more out of individual sets. I think it's super important. I would keep it in as a mainstay, at least minimum 4 days a week, if not more. It's only going to benefit you in the long run.
Does carb cycling have merit in a massing phase?
I do think that carb cycling has merit in a massing phase and in a growth phase, for lack of a better word. But to what extent? So again, I don't think that the difference between an off day and a training day should be that substantial where you truly feel it in your body. But if you're truly if you're at a point where you're gaining the goal amount of weight weekly, that's one thing to keep in mind. But I like to toggle carbohydrates up more on training days, and then I like to pull them back on off days. Now, that doesn't mean I like to have my athletes that are in a growth phase and a deficit on their off days, but that's the type of carb cycling approach that I like. If you're truly trying to gain weight and you're also trying to limit body fat, I think some type of carb cycling approach, whether it's off days and training days, that can work well. I am not one that overcomplicates the off season to do these you're going to have 3 high days and 1 low day, regardless of if it's an off day or a training day, or you're going to go 2 days high, 2 days low. I don't overcomplicate carb cycling to that point. And I think when a lot of people hear carb cycling, that's what they think of. I just simplify it. And this is another form of carb cycling where on your off days, you have a lower carbohydrate intake. And then on your training days, obviously you're driving that up. I think that's a great way to handle it. Now, in the last episode or previous episodes, I did talk about, when you get to a certain amount of a deficit, when your food starts to get low, whether you're in a dieting phase or whether you're in a contest prep, I then would argue that I think there's benefit to actually keeping the off day calorie consumption, carbohydrate consumption consistent with the training day, as long as you're making progress. But in the off season, I will for sure drive up carbohydrates more on training day and then bring them down slightly on their off day. So again, as I talked about previously, what I don't want to happen as well is, with your cheat meals, if your cheat meals are driving your weight up and then you're never hitting pre-cheat meal baseline, the same thing goes for your off day. So I don't like my athletes gaining weight or a lot of weight, scale weight, on their off days during their off seasons. So I bring the carbohydrates down just to maintain baseline weight, whatever that might be, to make sure that, the carbohydrate consumption isn't driving up their weight on off days, because I don't think that there's merit to that either. So just keep that in mind. All right, guys, this is episode 5. Again, thank you for the support. I hope this is just a help to you, a continued help. We'll continue to do these. I appreciate you guys being along for them.